Okay, welcome back. When I was last talking, I was talking about Barry Lava and how these are finished pieces in a way. They're installations, so they're actual objects that are in a gallery space or modifications of gallery spaces, but they are also like performances, like the Cleaver piece, where it is specifically about him doing an action, that action of swinging multiple cleavers exactly the same way into a wall. They're a one-time kind of thing. If he didn't do it right, he would just leave it. If it bounced off the wall or whatever, he would just leave it there, and trying as best as he can to have it hit the wall at that point with the bottom corner touching the floor every time. Uh, he didn't, it wasn't. It was done as an action, right? As a physical action rather than done as something like, because if he wanted to just make it look like the action, he could have cut holes into each of the wall and slid them in so that they fit exactly right. But as you notice, they aren't exactly right. They are a representation um, of the variability of chance. And so, um, Francis Morellet is a French artist who also created systems, right? So in a way, I would say you could call this a type of systems art, systems of mark making on his paintings that then, and those of you who know my work probably can start to see a connection here, right? Systems of mark making, systems of geometries where then by following that system all the way through, kind of without you necessarily knowing what the end result is, they start creating patterns that can be sometimes unexpected. Uh, Agnes Martin, in a much more minimalist kind of way, does something similar. I love Agnes Martin. I think she's probably one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, and did a whole lot with just vertical and horizontal lines. Once again, if you know my work, you kind of probably see a connection. Saul LeWitt took the idea of the artwork being just the content of the code, the system, to in some ways to an extreme, where he made some drawings where he made the drawings in his studio, and then he recorded as he made the drawings. He recorded every step of the action, put a point here, put a point there, put lines across from there to there. He recorded every single action as a list of instructions. He then destroyed the piece that was in his studio and sent the list of instructions to the gallery for them to recreate the piece exactly as he had created it in his own space. So in a way, he's like making a physical form of computer code, or paint by numbers, if you want to go. Keith Saunier, those of you who went to New Orleans the last time might remember we saw a Saunier piece. He is originally from New Orleans, which is one of the reasons why he's collected by those museums, but also he's an important and interesting kind of post-minimalist artist. And like someone like Dan Flavin, very much interested in light and color of light. And like I said, a lot of these ideas led to people making electronic work, making actual computer artwork, where they were interactive. Like the top piece here, the Wen Ying Tsai piece, the each of those rods, those curved rods, were attached to a device so that they would move and twist based on the sounds in the space, so that when people walked into the gallery, it would start to come alive and interact with the people in the space. And even an artist like Bruce Nauman, who generally is not seen as being part of the conceptual art movement or part of the process and systems art movement, when you really look at his performance pieces, though, and start looking at it, this idea of codifying actions, making the process of actions be as important as any of the end results, is in there in his work as well. Earlier, Anne asked a question about relational art, and I think Hans Haack is a good example of an artist who really made relational art. So he would make artwork that was, for him, relational because it was a critique of the process of art in itself. So he would make artwork for a museum, and then it would then be a critique of like things like, do you know that these patrons who give this much money to the museum are also doing these things? Like, so it becomes a critique of the whole museum system, where it becomes basically like the point it's trying to make is like museums become a way for major corporations like ExxonMobil to whitewash their own Dirty Deeds, yeah. He also made pieces that were critiques of the New York real estate system, but they were interactive. They were designed for people to participate in the process, so they were relational, both in that they were a critique of the whole system of art making, but they were also relational in that they encouraged, audience or viewer participation. Here are some more of his pieces that are related to that. Terry Winters is an artist who's a favorite of mine, and he is a process-based artist in a much more kind of like straightforward and literal, but still I think very powerful kind of way, which is once again kind of like Morley. He's very much an artist who designs a set of processes for him to follow, and then just keeps following them over and over again until he finds an interesting idea, an interesting image idea out of that process. Um, and so you see that in his sketches, in his printmaking, and in his paintings. So now we're getting to some contemporary artists, and as those of you who have been hearing this lecture know, we're going a little faster. And the contemporary artists that I want to talk about, some of them, a lot of them are very much related to this relational kind of idea. So Karsten Haller did this piece, a big museum scale gallery piece that involved slides that went through the floor, multiple levels, so that involving kind of like audience participation, but also a piece where he kept a herd of reindeer in the bottom floor of the museum, and then fed the reindeer a certain type of mushroom, which apparently exists in the wild in Lapland. And then the reindeer, when they eat this mushroom, then their urine becomes psychedelic. And I'm never quite clear whether he had people actually then use the urine as a drug or not as part of his piece. But so here's some other examples of artists doing relational. That's right. No 5-year-old could arrange to have a herd of reindeer brought down from Lapland. That takes some capital, if nothing else. Here are some different artists who do relational works. I don't have time to talk about all of them. The Philippe Perreno piece is a piece where he and his collaborator of his, they bought an anime character. Her name was Ann Lee. I can't remember what anime she came from, but they bought her as a character. The anime was shut down. They then owned the rights to her character. They then made a digital version of her, and then they basically created an AI to kind of like run her, and then they set her free, and then they made videos about her being freed from her life of anime servitude. Or Jillian Waring, who's done a number of performance pieces, like the famous piece she did in graduate school where she went to all these different train stations across England, brought boombox, and in each train station danced her tukis off. Phil Collins does performance pieces where he creates, once again, also often in train stations, he creates karaoke spaces with green screens, and then encourages audience participation, and everything that people do then becomes part of the piece when it's then exhibited in a museum. Yes, different from the Phil Collins who made 80s rock music. Now we're getting to some graphic designers. Of all the graphic designers that I can think of contemporary graphic designers, David Carson probably represents this idea of putting process over product, where he is, in the way he made artwork, he was trying to push himself and trying to do things unexpected and seeing what surprised him, rather than just simply going for this is what the client wants kind of approach. He's known for that phrase, don't mistake legibility for communication. And he brings that kind of, that idea of that what he's trying to say is that sometimes confusion in communication, sometimes ambiguity in communication can be part of the communication, can be part of what you're connecting with the audience. That sometimes when things are hard to read, that difficulty in reading is actually part of the aesthetic feel, and that also part of the aesthetic communication of the work. Also, this is a very contemporary graphic design firm based in London, Man vs. Machine, and they do a lot of very kind of like performance-based pieces as part of